The snow fell silently outside the cafe window, each flake dancing through the cold December air like tiny fragments of frozen dreams. Inside the warm refuge of Marguerite's coffee house, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the bitter chill outside. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans mingled with the sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls, and soft jazz music played in the background, creating a cocoon of comfort against the harsh winter day. At a corner table by the large bay window, Marcus Ashford sat alone, his expensive cashmere coat draped over the chair beside him, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee that had long since grown cold. At 43 years old, Marcus was a man who had everything and nothing all at once. As the CEO of Ashford Technologies, a multinational corporation worth billions, he had built an empire from the ground up. His name was synonymous with innovation and success, appearing regularly in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Yet beneath the perfectly tailored suits and the confident demeanor that commanded boardrooms across the world, there lived a man hollowed out by loss. 3 years ago, his wife Elena had died suddenly from an aneurysm, leaving him alone in a mansion that echoed with memories and a future that stretched before him like an endless, colorless road. He had thrown himself into his work with obsessive dedication, but success had proven to be a poor substitute for the warmth of human connection. That particular afternoon, Marcus had escaped from yet another tedious board meeting, seeking solace in the small neighborhood cafe far from the gleaming towers of the financial district. He came here sometimes when the weight of his loneliness became too heavy to bear alone in his office. The cafe reminded him of simpler times, of Sunday mornings with Elena when they would sit for hours discussing everything and nothing, when life had texture and meaning beyond quarterly reports and stock prices. He was staring out the window, watching the snow accumulate on the sidewalk, when he heard a small, tentative voice beside him. "Excuse me, sir. Can I sit here?" Marcus turned, surprised to find a little girl standing next to his table, no more than 5 years old, with large hazel eyes that seemed too weary for her age. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days, and on her head was a pink knitted beanie with a cheerful pom-pom that contrasted sharply with her pale, wan complexion. In her arms, she clutched a worn teddy bear that had clearly been loved for many years, its fur matted in places, one of its button eyes hanging by a thread. Marcus glanced around the cafe, searching for the child's parent or guardian, but saw no one who seemed to be with her. The cafe was only moderately busy, and none of the other patrons appeared to be looking for a lost child. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. The little girl's eyes dropped to the floor. "My mommy is in the hospital," she said quietly. "My grandma brought me here because she needed to make phone calls about bills. She's outside talking, and it's very cold. She said I could come inside to warm up." Something in Marcus's chest tightened painfully. He recognized that look in the child's eyes, the particular kind of fear that comes from understanding, at far too young an age, that the world is not always a safe or fair place. "Of course you can sit here," he said, pulling out the chair across from him. "Please." The little girl climbed onto the chair, arranging her teddy bear carefully beside her. Her movements were slow and deliberate, and Marcus noticed how thin her wrists were, how the skin beneath her eyes was shadowed with exhaustion. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, trying to make his voice warm and non-threatening. He wasn't accustomed to talking to children. He and Elena had never had the chance to have kids of their own, but something about this little girl called to something deep within him, something he thought had died with his wife. "Lily," she replied, her small hands folded on the table. "Lily Henderson. What's yours?" "I'm Marcus," he said, omitting his last name. "It's nice to meet you, Lily. Is that your friend?" He gestured to the teddy bear. For the first time, a tiny smile flickered across Lily's face. "This is Mr. Butterscotch. He was my daddy's when he was little. Daddy's in heaven now, with the angels." The simple, matter-of-fact way she said it struck Marcus like a physical blow. This tiny child had already experienced more loss than many adults would face in a lifetime. "I'm very sorry about your daddy," Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Lily nodded solemnly. "Mommy says he's always watching over us. But now Mommy is sick too. She has something wrong with her blood. The doctors say she needs special medicine, but it costs a lot of money. Grandma cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not listening." Marcus felt his throat constrict. He had spent years insulated from this kind of raw, desperate poverty by layers of wealth and privilege. He donated to charities, of course, significant amounts that earned his company good publicity and tax breaks, but he had forgotten, or perhaps had never truly understood, what those donations meant in human terms. Here was the face of need, sitting across from him in a pink beanie, clutching a threadbare teddy bear. "What's wrong with your mother?" he asked gently. Lily's small face scrunched up in concentration as she tried to remember the medical terminology. "The doctor said she has Luke something. Leukemia. She needs something called a bone marrow transplant, but we're on a waiting list, and even if we get one, the medicine afterward costs more money than Grandma has ever seen. Grandma had to sell our house. Now we live in a small apartment, and it's always cold." Marcus's mind was already working, calculating, planning in the way that had made him a business legend. Leukemia. Bone marrow transplant. Post-transplant care. He knew these things were expensive, catastrophically so for families without adequate insurance, but he also knew they were entirely treatable with proper resources. Resources he had in abundance. Resources he had been hoarding like some kind of modern-day dragon, sitting alone in his castle of glass and steel while children like Lily watched their mothers die from treatable diseases. "Are you hungry, Lily?" Marcus asked suddenly. The little girl's eyes widened, and she nodded, her careful composure cracking slightly. "I haven't eaten since breakfast. Grandma said we need to save money for Mommy's medicine." Marcus felt anger rise in him, not at the grandmother, who was clearly doing everything she could, but at a system that forced people to choose between food and medicine, at a world that could be so casually cruel to its most vulnerable inhabitants. "Well, we can't have that," he said, standing up. "Let's get you something to eat. Do you like hot chocolate?" Lily's face transformed with a joy so pure and complete that Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. "I love hot chocolate, but I don't have any money." "My treat," Marcus said firmly. "It's too cold outside for anyone to be without hot chocolate." He walked to the counter and ordered the works. A large hot chocolate with extra whipped cream for Lily, a grilled cheese sandwich, a cup of soup, and a chocolate chip cookie the size of her face. When the barista raised an eyebrow at the order, Marcus added, "And box up a dozen of those sandwiches and some cookies to go." He didn't consciously decide what he was about to do. It simply became clear to him in that moment, as inevitable as gravity. He had spent 3 years sleepwalking through his life, going through the motions of existence without truly living. Elena had always said that wealth meant nothing if you didn't use it to make the world better. She had volunteered at homeless shelters and children's hospitals, had dragged him to fundraisers and charity events, had insisted they use their privilege to lift others up. After she died, he had stopped all of that, had withdrawn into himself and his work, had forgotten that there were reasons to be alive beyond simply existing. When he returned to the table with the food, Lily's eyes went round as saucers. "This is all for me," she whispered. "All for you," Marcus confirmed. He watched as she ate, trying not to let his heartbreak show on his face as she carefully saved half of everything, clearly planning to bring it home for her grandmother. As they sat there in the warm café while the snow continued to fall outside, Lily began to talk. She told him about her mother, a nurse who had worked double shifts to support them after Lily's father had died in a construction accident 2 years earlier. She talked about her grandmother, who had arthritis in her hands but still took in sewing work to make extra money. She told him about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian someday so she could help sick animals the way doctors were helping her mother. The more Lily talked, the more Marcus realized how much he had isolated himself from the world. This little girl, who had every reason to be bitter and angry, spoke with hope and love, with concern for others despite her own desperate circumstances. She worried about her grandmother being cold. She talked about making her mother laugh even though her mother was sick. She spoke about Mr. Butterscotch as though the worn teddy bear was a treasured friend, which Marcus supposed he was. "Lily," Marcus said when she had finished eating, "I want to help your mother." The little girl looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "That's very nice, sir, but we don't have money to pay you back. Grandma says we don't take charity." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding pride even when it was self-destructive. "What if it's not charity? What if it's something else?" Lily tilted her head, curious. "Like what?" A promise, Marcus said, the idea forming as he spoke. A long time ago, someone I loved very much made me promise that I would use what I had to help people who needed it. I broke that promise for a long time, but meeting you today reminds me that promises are important. So if I help your mother, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it to keep a promise I made. Would that be okay? Lily considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Finally, she nodded. I think that would be okay. Promises are very important. At that moment, an elderly woman burst through the cafe door, her face drawn with worry. Lily! Oh, thank God! I told you to wait right by the door. The woman rushed over, and Lily slid down from her chair. I'm sorry, Grandma. I was cold, and this nice man let me sit with him and gave me food. Look, I saved you half. The grandmother's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the carefully wrapped leftovers, then at Marcus, seeming to truly see him for the first time. There was suspicion there, and fear, the natural wariness of a woman who had learned that the world was not always kind, especially to those who had little. Marcus stood, extending his hand. Mrs. Henderson, my name is Marcus Ashford. I own Ashford Technologies. Your granddaughter is a remarkable young lady, and I'd like to help with your daughter's medical expenses if you'll allow me. The grandmother's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, hope, fear, and finally, desperate calculation. I don't understand, she said. Why would you do that? We're nobody. We're nothing to you. You're not nothing, Marcus said firmly. You're never nothing. Your granddaughter helped me remember something important today, and I'd like to help your family in return. Please, let me do this. What followed in the weeks and months after that snowy afternoon was nothing short of miraculous. Marcus used his connections to get Lily's mother, Jennifer Henderson, transferred to one of the best cancer centers in the country. He hired a team of specialists, covered all medical expenses, and ensured that a suitable bone marrow donor was found. But more than that, he got involved. He visited Jennifer in the hospital, sat with her during chemotherapy sessions, and listened to her talk about her daughter, her late husband, her fears and hopes. He set up a trust fund for Lily's education, purchased a comfortable home for the family, and created a job for Mrs. Henderson at one of his company's community outreach programs. But the gifts flowed both ways. Through the Henderson family, Marcus rediscovered what it meant to be truly alive. Lily visited him regularly, bringing drawings from school and telling him stories about her day. Mrs. Henderson taught him to cook actual meals instead of eating takeout every night. And Jennifer, once she recovered, became a dear friend who wasn't afraid to call him out when he worked too hard or withdrew into himself. They became the family he thought he'd lost forever, and in helping them, he found a purpose that had eluded him in all his years of corporate success. A year after that fateful meeting in the cafe, Marcus stood in his backyard watching Lily play with a new puppy he'd gotten her for her birthday. Jennifer was in remission, healthy and strong. Mrs. Henderson was laughing at something on her phone. The house was full of life and noise and love, things that had been absent for too long. As the little girl in the pink beanie ran past, teddy bear tucked under one arm and puppy barking at her heels, Marcus felt Elena's presence in a way he hadn't in years. He imagined her smiling, approving, telling him that this was what she'd always wanted for him. Not loneliness and work, but connection and purpose and love. All because a sick little girl had asked a simple question: "Can I sit here?" Sometimes, Marcus reflected, the most important moments in our lives come disguised as small, ordinary requests. Sometimes salvation comes in the form of a child with a threadbare teddy bear. And sometimes, the person doing the rescuing turns out to be the one who needed saving all along.